talk program. I'm very pleased to invite Professor Tomonaga Tairako, the worldly distinguished scholar, as a speaker for this afternoon's talk. Professor Tairako is a leading Marxist philosopher and sociologist in Japan. Professor Tairako is currently an emeritus professor at Hitotsubashi University and the co-representative of Marx Society of Japan. Professor Tairako has developed an innovative and praxis-oriented and ecology-oriented Marxism school in Japan with late Otani Reinosuke, Ryuji Sasaki, and Kohei Saito, and other scholars, following the tradition of late Samejo Kuma, based on new reading of Marx, centering on the concepts reification and metabolism. Professor Tairako has published many books and articles on Marx philosophy and critique of political economy. Among his recent books are Reading Marx from his Excerpt-Notebooks, editing the fourth section of the Mega and essays on Marx Excerpt-Notebooks, and Beyond Capitalism, Introduction to Marx. Professor Tairako has also participated in the editing of new Mega Marx Engels Gesamtaufgabe project, especially Mega Section 4, 18, is published in 2019. Last December, Professor Tairako gave a talk on a criticism of Kiyoshi Mochizuki's interpretation of Marx, a chapter of the criticism of post-war Japanese Marxism for this SSK program. So I personally learned very much from Professor Tairako's excellent talk, especially his distinction of reification, signification, and fetishism in Marx's critique of political economy. You can listen his talk through YouTube. This afternoon, Professor Tairako will talk about the late Marx, his Excerpt-Notebooks on Maurer, and the drafts for the letter to Vera Zassoulitch. You can download Professor Tairako's paper on the chatting room. Professor Tairako will talk about 40 minutes. Professor Tairako, welcome, and you have a floor.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Seongjin Jeong. I'm very glad to be able to speak about my opinion on the late Marx. Today's title is The Late Marx, Marx's Excerpt-Notebooks from Maurer and the drafts for the letter to Zassoulitch. And subtitle is From Justus Maurer to Maurer. I read. My speech consists of 4 parts. The first part is Marx's variation of rural community and peasantry. I read. Page 1. In writing the manuscript to the 3rd volume of Capital, the more Marx comes to recognize destructive effects of the capitalist production on nature and human being in terms of the rupture of metabolism between nature and human being, the more he positively reassesses the cultural potentialities historically and geographically accumulated in the rural community, as is found in the following passage. I don't read the quotation to the page, second page. For the first time in his lifetime, Marx positively determines the rural community as, I quote, the last places in which natural genetic, in German, Naturwüchsige energy of labor forces takes refuge and accumulates itself as a reservoir for the revival of vital energy of the nations. Marx places more historical value on the peasantry mode of production in the rural community than before, in contrast to the devastation of nature and the disturbance in the metabolism between nature and human being caused by big industry and industrially administered agriculture. The peasantry mode of production has been the one in which laborers have been keeping the relations to land and as a means of production as their own property, or at least their own possession, and which has been nourishing laborers' free individuality and personal independence for many centuries. In this sense, we can understand why, in the manuscripts of the third volume of Capital, Marx characterizes the rural community as a reservoir in which cultural energy and resources of the people in all regions are historically accumulated. However, Marx did not place such positive value on the rural community and the peasantry mode of production before then. In 1840s, he rather positively estimates a revolutionary role of bourgeoisie to annihilate pre-capitalist communities with peasants as their main constituent members and to transform self-sustaining peasants into the proletariat. In a series of articles on Indian problems that he contributes to New York Daily Tribune, he still positively estimates the civilizing effect of capital, and from this perspective affirms the rule of Great Britain over India because the British colonial rule has demolished the small-scale half-barbarian, half-civilized rural community in India, and in this manner brought about the only social revolution that Asia had never experienced before. However, his encounter with the Taiping rebellion in China and the Sepoy revolt in India gradually motivates him to change his negative attitude towards self-sustaining Asian rural communities. What at first surprises him is the vast amount of political military energy and powers resistant against the European colonial powers that emerged in the midst of the Asian communities that are believed to passively accept any rule by a foreign conqueror and to be only intent on maintaining the traditional self-sufficient way of production and life. Marx finds among the Asian communities a great amount of energy to tenaciously resist the capitalist globalization and tries to theoretically explain these resistant powers in the theoretical framework of capital. So go to the page 4. According to Marx's new perspective, the Asian communities owe their a very stubborn resistance to the foreign products made by industries of the most developed European countries and to their colonial intervention, to the unity of the small-scale agriculture and household industry that provide the communities with sustainable and self-sustaining way of production of life. So I go to the second chapter, a turning point in Marx's theory on pre-capitalist societies. Marx's Excerpt-Notebooks on Maurer. Page 5. After the publication of the first volume of Capital, Marx immediately set about his work on the second volume of Capital. This work was, however, many times interrupted. As a result, he was not able to complete his main work during his lifetime. The reasons for this could be ascribed not only to bad health that had continuously tormented him or purely scientific problems that the second and third volume of Capital had required him to solve, but also to the encounter with new theoretical topics that motivated him to expand his intellectual horizon of his knowledge. The newly obtained knowledge prompted him to critically reconsider arguments presented in the first volume of Capital, partly modify them, and what is more, give up some of them. Marx's voluminous Excerpt-Notebooks, which are planned to comprise the fourth department of Mega, document his process of thinking after 1868 that gives us a hint as to why capital remained incomplete. Marx gives up his opinion on the three basic forms of pre-capitalist communal property, the Asiatic, the antique, and the Germanic forms described in the Grundrisse. Through his intensive study of Maurer from 1868 onward, after the publication of the first volume of Capital in March 68, Marx gets to know the works by Maurer on Marktkommunes, in German, Marktgenossenschaften, which Marx regards as especially important and draws up detailed excerpts from him twice. Maurer directs Marx's attention to the fact that the regular allotment of arable lands takes place in the Germanic communes, and this custom still survives even in the 19th century. The allotment of cultivated land presupposes a large extent of power of communes to regulate the work and the life of communal members. The Germanic commune is no longer regarded as the one consistent of independent individual farmers, as was the case in the Grundrisse. We can consider Marx's Excerpt-Notebooks on Maurer as a turning point in his understanding on pre-capitalist societies. Marx mentions Maurer for the first time in his letter to Engels of March 4th, 68. I don't read the quotation. And so let's go to the page 7. Page 7. As Engels received this letter in 1868, he did not know what Marx had written in the Grundrisse 10 years before. Now we know that he shared a stupid assumption by Westphalian Juncker, Maurer, etc., that each of the German people separately settled down and later formed villages, because in the Grundrisse he wrote, I read English translation. Marx himself wrote in the Grundrisse, among the German people where the individual patres familiares settled down in the forests, the commune exists only through occasional unification of members of the community. While writing down the Grundrisse, he still thinks that in the Germanic community, the individual member with his family settles down in the forest in a separated way and does not gather in the village. This idea is abandoned after he insistently studied Maurer. Another letter to Engels of March 25th, 1868 indicates that his interest in Maurer is still more increasing. I go to the page 9. Page 9, okay. Maurer persuades Marx to consider Caesar in Latinish pronunciation, not Caesar, Caesar and Tacitus, as witnesses as two completely different stages of the development of Germanic Commune before and after the Common Era, both of which he later classifies as a more archaic communities and the Agrarian Commune, respectively. Caesar in his De Bello Gallico and Tacitus in his Germania leaves us following important descriptions about the primeval Germanic communities. So I quote from Caesar and Tacitus 5 very important quotation. But for the sake of the limit of time, I don't read this quotation. Please go to the page 11. The last line. Based on the quotation, the stage described by Caesar in the history of Germanic communes is characterized by the following features, page 12. In Caesar's times, all the Germanic communes are primarily organized as hunting and military communes. Among the Sueban tribes play a very important role in Caesar's work. Among the Sueban, 1,000 armed men are annually conscripted from each village. They wage war and plunder regions outside their country, while the at-home remaining members who cultivate the land and engaged in hunting and stock farming are responsible for providing for soldiers and their families. The next year, another 1,000 men that in the previous year engaged in cultivation and so on go to the battlefield, while the soldiers come home and provide for the present soldiers and their families. The magistrates in Latin magistratus and the chiefs in Latin principes annually allot a piece of land for 1 year to tribes and kindreds. The following year, they force them to leave their allotted land. A unit of allotment has not yet been an individual family, as is the case in Tacitus' times, but a blood relative, in Latin, gens and cognatus. Household industries like spinning and weaving that characterize Asian communities have not been established yet. Any individual or private property of land has not existed yet. Between Caesar and Tacitus, there exists a time lag of 150 years. During this period, the old Germanic commune experiences a radical transformation. The stage described by Tacitus is characterized by a transition from a warrior's commune to an agrarian one. Lands, one area after another in proportion to the number of cultivators are occupied for tillage by the whole body of cultivators. They then distribute it among themselves according to rank. The common property of land by a commune that Tacitus calls wix is still preserved, but independent households of individual families are increasingly expanded, although the arable fields in a commune are already annually re-allotted to its members. Even in Tacitus' times, any household industry like spinning and weaving has not yet been established yet. The stage described by Tacitus corresponds to the Agrarian Commune outlined in the drafts for the letter to Zassoulitch. Maurer draws Marx's attention to complicated compulsory communal regulations in the primeval Germanic communities. The Germans constitute their own commune called Genossenschaft in German, with their cognates or tribes as units. The Genossenschaft determines all spaces that are available to its members for different purposes as marks, like farm marks, field marks, forest marks, meadow marks, pasture marks, water marks, road marks, and so on. And the factual proprietor of these marks, it allots a space for a house and a courtyard and arable field to each family member, which every fixed year re-allotted by lots. Therefore, they are also called Ackerlos, arable fields by lots. The Hofmark and the Ackermark belong to communal members as their individual property. On the other hand, meadows, pastures, forests, rivers, and marshlands remain communal land, the use of which by each member is strictly determined by the commune. Each communal member is permitted to cultivate the allotted fields for no more than the fixed years. The regular allotment of arable fields customarily takes place. Maurer describes manifold complicated compulsory rules of communal regulation. So the next quotation is very important, but I had no time to translate it into English. I'm sorry for it. So go to the page 14. As Marx published in the first volume of Capital, he had not recognized the importance of works by Maurer. Maurer was for the first time mentioned in the second edition of Capital. Increasingly intensive study of Maurer leads Marx to change a view on Germanic communal property that he entertains in the section on the forms that precedes the capitalist production in the Grundrisse. Just after the above quoted correspondence with Engels, Marx starts to carefully read Maurer's handwriting and drafts, voluminous excerpts from him. I go to the next paragraph. Marx positively accepted Maurer's theory of the Germanic Genossenschaft. As its result, he was motivated to radically change his former idea on the primeval Germanic community in the Grundrisse. Firstly, the fundamental character of the Germanic property form is no longer characterized as the individual property of free landowners, but the whole community, Genossenschaft, in terms of the factual proprietor of all communal territories, strictly regulates the whole life of communal members by allotting their houses and farms, allotting arable lands by drawing lots and determining the time to sow, plow, and harvest, etc. Secondly, the oldest Germans are assembled in different tribes, living on hunting and stock farming, continually moving in search for games and pasture. They are in principle wandering nomads. In Caesar's period, they reach a form of nomadic economy combined with primitive agriculture. Even then, however, they are mainly engaged in stock farming and wandering in search for pasture, while agriculture is still subordinate business. In Tactics period, they gradually begin to permanently settle down and engage in agriculture as their main business. As a result, an individual farm, Hof, as an administration unit begins to be established. So I come to the third chapter, a new interpretation of Marx's draft for the letter to Zassoulitch. According to the drafts for the letter to Zassoulitch, Marx classifies three successive phases in the development of the Germanic Commune. First, the first form corresponds to the Germanic Commune before the coming into existence of the Agrarian Commune, as described by Caesar. Marx regards this stage as a more archaic type of the Germanic Commune, which is characterized by the fact that the fields are annually allotted to groups of the same kinship, but have not yet been allotted to any individual household and cultivation is also collectively done by groups. Second, the second form is called the Agrarian Commune, which is characterized by the fact that independent agrarian management by individual households in the same commune has already been introduced, while the annual allotment of arable fields through the commune still continues, and private property by individual farmers has not yet been established as described in Germanian Tactics. Page 16, third. The third form is called the secondary formation of the society or the new commune, which originates in the transformation of the agrarian commune, which is characterized by two main factors. Firstly, the last phase of primitive formation of the society. Secondly, a phase of transition to the secondary formation. The secondary formation is characterized by the fact that the fields already belong to individual farmers as their private property, while forest pastures and cultivated lands remain communal property. Go to page 17. Furthermore, this formation comprises a series of societies grounded on slavery and serfdom. This formation corresponds to the Germanic form of original property or the Germanic property described in the Grundrisse. By this, we can recognize that Marx's perspective on the Germanic commune in the Grundrisse is confined to the latest stage of its development and does not cover its earlier stage that Marx, in the drafts for the letter to Zassoulitch, introduces to his concept of the theory of pre-capitalist societies. To be sure, we must not underestimate the substantial difference between the third form, called the new commune, and the Germanic commune in the Grundrisse, because Marx recognizes the emergence of private property in the new commune, while in the Grundrisse, the Germanic commune doesn't admit private property yet, but only individual property. It interests us that in the third draft for the letter to Zassoulitch, Marx considers that the transition from the first to the second form as a natural development. In contrast to this, the disappearance of the agrarian commune and its transition to the new commune, admitting of private property, takes place because of uninterrupted wars and the Germanic migration. Therefore, the second transition could not be regarded as an inevitable spontaneous process. He contends that without the encroachment of alien tribes and incessant wars, the agrarian commune could have survived through the whole medieval ages. Here, we can assume that Marx recognizes two types of historical development of various social economic formations. That is to say, first, the first type of transition consists in the transition inside the primitive formation of the societies from a commune without any private property to a commune accompanied by private property of individual household defined as the agrarian commune. This transition mainly takes place based on a natural spontaneous development immanent in the primitive formation of the societies. On the contrary, the second type of transition consists in a more radical transformation from the primitive formation to the secondary formation, mainly transition from the society based on communal property to the society based on private property. The second transition is caused by the violence inflicted on it by extraneous forces like wars or invasion of alien ethnic groups. According to the late Marx, the introduction of the establishment of private property is no longer an historical necessity that founds on the spontaneous development immanent to a society, but a result of natural changes inflicted by alien powers. So I go to, so how many minutes I have still? 10 minutes. Please.
You have about 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay. Then page 19. So first, what changed? What changed? So in the thought of the late Marx, first, the Asian mode of production is no longer regarded as the oldest form. Together with a modified view on the Germanic Commune, Marx also changes his opinion on the Asian Commune, which is no longer regarded as the oldest form of the primitive commune that every civilized nation must have once gone through at the beginning of its medieval history, but the latest, newest form of the archaic social formation. As Marx often insists, the Asian communities are characterized as those equipped with a direct combination of agriculture and manufacture, spinning and weaving. Marx owes the change on the historical status of the Asian community to the witnesses given by Caesar and Tacitus to the way of life of the Germanic around the beginning of the Common Era. So please look at the quotation 6 from Caesar. I read the English translation. Caesar says, the Germans' whole life is composed of hunting expeditions and military pursuits. From early boyhood, they are jealous for toil and hardship. There is no secrecy in the sexual matter. It's very important description. They don't wear clothes. For both sexes bathe in the rivers and wear skins or small cloaks of fur and hide, leaving great part of the body bare. For agriculture, they have no zeal, and the greater part of their food consists of milk, cheese, and flesh. The next quotation. From Caesar. The Suebi do not live much on corn, but chiefly on milk and cattle, and are engaged in hunting. Moreover, they have habitually trained themselves to wear nothing, even in the coldest localities, except skins, the scantiness of which leaves a great part of the body bare. Tacitus. So the last line. From quotation 8 from Tacitus. They all wrap themselves in a cloak which is fastened with a clasp, or if this is not forthcoming, with a thong, leaving the rest part of their bodies bare. The last line. Their upper and lower arm of women is thus bare, and the nearest part of the bosom is also exposed, and so on. Page 22. In Caesar's period, the Germans wear nothing but fur and hide, leaving great part of the body bare, while they mainly live on milk, cheese, and flesh. They have no zeal for agriculture and prefer hunting and military expeditions. In Tacitus' period, about 150 years later, the richest class has a custom to wear a tight dress, and women to wear linen dresses with short sleeves, which makes their upper and lower arm bare, and the nearest part of the bosom is also exposed. Most men are, even in the battlefield, almost naked, or wear a little cloak called sagrum. We see that the primeval Germanic community has not reached the phase of the Asian community equipped with the unity of agriculture, of domestic handicraft manufacture. So I go to page 23. As we saw, the Germanic communes are not armed with this oriental complementarity of agriculture and manufacture. They represent a far more primitive form of community in the human history than the Asian form. Therefore, we cannot derive different original types of the Roman and Germanic private property from different forms of the Indian communal property. I quoted from Marx's earlier works. As a result, the right Marx must reshuffle different forms of communities existing in the human history and rearrange them in the historical development of human beings. The next, the second change, the emergence of private property is not historical inevitability. Okay. As I have written while writing the drafts for the letter to Zassoulitch, Marx recognizes two different types of historical transformation of primeval Germanic societies. I go to the page 24. From the middle, Marx changed understanding of private property as a historical contingency contributes to his changed idea of the pre-capitalist history. Firstly, the theoretical validity of re-establishment of individual property based on the achievement of the capitalist era as a negation of negation through capitalist private property as the first negation of individual private property, which Marx describes in the first volume of Capital, is restricted to Western Europe. Secondly, in some regions outside Western Europe, existing communes work as the fulcrum of social regeneration. So replied Marx in his letter to Zassoulitch, adding the following reservation. There are two possible courses towards overcoming the global capitalist system, mainly the one through the abolition of private property, the European course, and secondly, another through the natural spontaneous development of rural communities, the non-West European course, but not everybody applicable, everywhere applicable. The goal of the first course is characterized as the re-establishment of individual property as a negation of negation in the first volume of Capital, while the goal of another one is described as the return of the modern society to a superior form of the most archaic type. The first draft was a letter to Zassoulitch. In this context, the letter to Zassoulitch by Marx is greatly significant because he admits two different types of transformation movements in the human history, namely, firstly, the Western movement from one form of private property into another form of private property. Secondly, the non-European movement from communal property into private property. I think I have no more time. Therefore, I stop by this, but at last, I'd like to say that what I speak today, so I owe my description very much to Professor Kevin Anderson's very masterwork. Marx's margins. I follow his study, and a little, I would like to go further a little. So therefore, I'm very grateful to Professor Kevin Anderson. Thank you very much for everyone to listening, pay attention to me. Okay.
Professor Tairako, thank you very much for a great talk. In your talk, you persistently demonstrated that Marx thought on the archaic agrarian communes have significantly changed in his later years through the painstaking reading, not only Marx's Excerpt-Notebooks on Maurer's book and the draft letters to Vera Zassoulitch, but also Kaiser and Tacitus and Maurer's works. It's written in Latin, German, in French. Yeah, it's really great. Professor Tairako's talk seems to remarkably concurs with Professor Kevin Anderson's SSP talk on late Marx last week, reinforcing with each other and open a new horizon for envisioning post-capitalism today. So many thanks again for your wonderful talk. And so as Kevin is here, I would like to know your reactions or your opinions of Professor Tairako's talk. Could you? Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Nice to see you again, Tomonaga. I think you've really created a very interesting point. I mean, a number of points, but one of the ones is to have these three stages. The first of two are I guess they're what Marx calls spontaneous development. You call it natural, but I think his own word is spontaneous development in the draft of the letter to Zassoulitch. And then that third one that's imposed by outside influences like warfare or coming in contact with a more developed civilization. One thing you don't mention, though, which I was surprised to me, is the Asian societies are class societies, aren't they? Whereas these other ones are not. The first two are not. So I think to make it more precise, it would be important to indicate that. And then I guess a bibliographical point, it's also at the end of the notes on Morgan, if I can remember correctly, that Marx talks a little bit about the Germanic Commune in the ethnological notebooks, and he quotes some of those passages from Caesar and Tacitus that you were quoting. So you probably looked at that already, but if not, you should look at that. I guess I have two questions, though. One is the focus on private property over and over again, because certainly in Latin America, you have the Incas and the Aztecs, which are societies which have dominant classes, I think we could say, but those classes hold the property collectively, especially the Incas seem to have had. So, I'm just not sure, how that would affect your model. And the second thing is, I think it's great, really great, the way you said there's two pathways of overcoming capitalism, right? And one is, the pathway at the end of Capital Volume 1. The second one is the possibility of the rural commune getting back to a spontaneous or natural development, as opposed to, the class and private property being forced upon it. But I think, maybe, I don't know if we agree on this, but I think Marx is saying that the one might be possible by itself, but the second one, he says pretty clearly in the manifesto preface of 1882 that if it can connect with a proletarian movement in the West, because the problem is that these other societies get so much stronger, they're going to overwhelm the rural commune in Russia. So it's two pathways, but they're interconnected because the second one is not a isolated possibility unless we want to become like Maoists of the 1950s or something, which I don't think we do. So thank you very much. It's very interesting and important contribution.
Okay, may
Yes.
I speak? So, thank you very much, Professor Anderson. So, what you mentioned, so I agree with you. So, my work is rather so interpretation. I'm engaged in text hermeneutics, text interpretation. Therefore, what I can say is rather restricted to what Marx himself leaves us. Therefore, many points that Mr. Professor Anderson asks me is rather so a sort of expansion or the more development of what Marx himself writes. So, for example, first mention so about how we can interpret Asian society as class society. I think, for example, so Marx have not enough knowledge about Chinese society. He has too little information. So he knows just only about a small parts of Indian history. So therefore, I think, what do we think about the history of Asian civilized society and empires? So we cannot understand enough just only based upon Marx writings. This is we have to consider. I think so. We have to new framework. This is my standpoint. And secondly, you mentioned about the connection between Morgan and Caesar and Tacitus. So this point is very important, but so unfortunately, I don't think about this connection. Therefore, you can help me. But I'm not sure that Marx thinks of American indigenous community as the same has the same potentiality as Germanic community. So I'm not sure. Therefore, I can just apologize. And the third question you have mentioned about Latin America, class society, but collective class society accompanied by collective property. So this is also a very big question. And in Marx's Excerpt notes comprise descriptions about Latin America. Maybe as far as I remember, you yourself write some pages in your book. So this Latin America. But I'm sorry, I have no special idea about how to analyze or characterize Latin America property. The last question I have to, so I have responsibility for answer. So there are naturally two different possibility to transition in the course of overcoming capitalism. But the second course, through the re-establishment of rehabilitation of the rural community to the socialist community. I think even in Marx, so this possibility is very, how shall I say, not so big, even in Marx's time. But I think if we consider the late, so 1980s world, the capitalism is not so dominant as today's time. There are great amount of non-capitalist areas geographically. So therefore, I think the second path through rural community to the post-capitalist society has some theoretical reality in Marx's time. But I think this, the real possibility is rapidly disappearing. I think this is a big, very important difference at Marx's time and Lenin's time. There is a little, about 10 years difference, 1880s and 1890s. But this 10 year is even in Russia itself very, how shall I explain, decisive. Marx's idea or the second possibility is already in 1890s disappearing. So thank you very much. So I'm sorry, I can answer to your question so sufficient way. But so you you put me a very good question. So I want to consider this this question further in the future. Thank you very much. Okay. So, Mr. Seongjin asked me.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
I raised three questions. Yeah. Do you read?
Yeah. I have three questions regarding your presentation. First, as you confirmed in his last, that Marx formulated his post-capitalist visions as a return of modern society to superior high. Okay. And do you think late Marx's communitarian vision differs from mature Marx's concept of post-capitalism centering association? I think so. This your question. The first question refers to just the two different paths.
Yes.
To therefore the idea of the mature Marx refers to the first possibility, first cause, and return to a superior form of an archetype refers to the second path, which, but so Mr. Kevin Anderson thinks less independent possible without combination of technology and the support of labor movements.
Okay.
This is a second. Late Marx's vision suggested appears somewhat localist communitarian. Localist, okay. It appears different from early Marx world revolution, as was suggested. Yes. This is very interesting question. So I think localist communitarian, it seems, for example, the focus on rural communities seems localist communitarian. But so Marx was very impressed from the, for example, typing revolution. Typing revolt was a sepoy revolt of the 1850s. So the revolt of a revolution of peasants or rural inhabitants have a very not localist meaning, but also world historical meaning. And so this is also what we'd like to discuss about the potentiality of small-scale peasants. I have no time to read last pages of my paper. So last pages, I write that, for example, sorry. Yeah. For example, page 31. So last paragraph. Marx died in 1883. Now it is our task and our responsibility to make further steps in the direction that he had been advancing. A further step forward might be to admit that the peasantry and the rural community could offer indispensable energy for the non-European regions to transform themselves into capitalist societies in which the spontaneous energy in the peasant could be transformed into that of capitalist modernization. If adequate institutional framework is effectively arranged, the primitive accumulation of capital is not only a negative process in which peasants are compulsorily deprived of their lands and transformed into wage laborers without property, but also a positive process in which traditional ethos, knowledge, techniques, and culture embodied in the rural villages and peasants are made the best use of as historical cultural resources for setting up the capitalist system in each region in the non-European world. So this is a little different what Marx himself thinks, but I think the energy or the potentiality of small peasant or the rural community is not restricted to localities, but also so comprises a vast energy to establish the capitalist system itself. That I think in Japan, in Korea, the success of capitalism in these countries is only one time where the peasants, the great amount of peasants are still living, existing, and radically transforming of them into urban laborers. If the population, the majority of population is only urban laborers or proletariats, capitalism has no more such great energy. This is my hypothesis. We experienced in the 20th century the great development of East Asian capitalism is just partly is based upon the potentialities of rural communities of the peasantries. Now we are seeing, looking at Chinese capitalism based upon the still existing peasantry. Therefore, in this context, I don't regard the rural community not as just localist communitarian. There are very great range of world historical significance. Third, in your paper, though you did not present this afternoon, you argued that Engels did not share late Marx turn in project hybrids and undeniable that Engels has great interest in the Maurer, I explain his. So I agree with you. But as far as we read the writings by Marx and Engels, just after the death of Marx, Engels get the access to Marx's notebooks, and reading this, he just began to rehabilitate, or follow Marx. But in his lifetime, when Marx was alive, Marx did not openly tell Engels what is the major change or transformation of his own idea. Therefore, Engels knows very little. Therefore, Engels' opinion is rather closely related to the 1840s idea, or the near to the German ideology of the Manifesto of Communist Party. But on the other hand, Marx was far from 1840s. The most the greatest example is what I showed in the appendix. Engels is still believes in the revolutionary role of the bourgeoisie for the civilizing the world. But Marx no more believes it. Therefore, I think this third problem is also what we have to study, not simply for the sake of criticizing or underestimating Engels. But so rather, how shall I explain? It is difficult, but I would like to defend Engels, but still we have to recognize the big difference of Marx and Engels when Marx was alive. And just after Marx's death, Engels intensively began to study Maurer and so the old Germanic Commune, Caesar and Kaiser, but a little too late. Therefore, Engels could not discuss with Marx in a very productive way. This is just a tragedy.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much for your kind and very clear answers. Just yeah, one question related with my third point. What about Engels' articles? The Mark is published in 1882. It's before the death of Marx. So reading the Mark, it looks that Engels also had a great interest in the communities, it's Barak,
yes.
So do you think there is some differences in between Marx and Engels' opinion on the Mark or the agrarian communes? Because in that article, Engels also discussed Maurer's and Caesar's or Tacitus' works.
Yes.
Okay.
I think, okay, thank you very much. But so I have not yet have the final answer, but as far as I read Engels' description, he has not yet a great historical framework. Engels is mainly engaged in rather details description. Therefore, Marx, for example, in the drafts for the letter to Zassoulitch, Marx describes a great historical framework. It has a very great potentiality, theoretical potentiality, if Marx would live further. But Engels' study to the old Germanic society is engaged in rather detailed description that has no positive theoretical framework. And also, so one great factor is Engels has no great idea about this rupture between the young 1840s and the 1880s. So Marx experienced a great transformation, theoretical transformation, and he is very self-conscious about this. But Engels has no such shocking idea. Therefore, when he studies further, he tried to integrate such knowledge into his former framework. But this is not my final answer. I'd like to study further.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
I understand.
And
Professor Anderson, you have,
Anderson.
yeah, you have some,
Jeong, I think he does always individual free paths, but incorrect, but that would be critical of the natural development. But he had become much more sympathetic to ruler. On your third point, I agree completely. I think Engels did not grasp this. Okay, thank you. It's a tremendous contribution. No, Professor Kevin Anderson, thank you very much. But I studied very much and very essential parts from your margins, marks at the margins, and I also I tried to further develop this starting point which you set for us.
I think you were too modest. And
No.
In my next book,
Yes.
I think I made an error in my first book, which is to not discuss enough the Maurer letter.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very important to understand what Marx was doing at the end of his life. So that's a really important contribution. Yeah, I guess this thing, he loves the rural commune at the end of his life, but this free, I don't know if he ever gives up completely what he says in chapter 1 of Capital, that these are societies which lack a full individual development of the individual in the modern sense. So I don't know if he ever gives that up completely. What do you think? I mean, because Professor Jeong is kind of trying to point to a continuity there.
This is, I think, a very actual problems. It's so equality, the problem of equality, and today's people are not very critical to the inequality or the patriarchal inequality inside the community. Therefore, I think the liberty of the producers, or liberty of pre-capitalist or a pre-modern society is mainly based upon such basic inequality. It comprises in itself rather several sorts of servitude or dependence. So this modern society doesn't accept, permit this such type of freedom, which contains in itself some sort of dependence. So this problem is really, I think, political, social problems. So on the one hand, to protect natural environment, so we have to support the indigenous or traditional self-sustaining mode of production. But in itself, there is some sort of dependent relations, inequalities, gender, also classes. So how should I do treat with such problem is, I think, real political and social problem. I have to have not yet final answer to this, but I would like to be thinking about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, Professor Tairako, yeah, it looks that you studied very hard because the paper that you sent last week, and today's paper, it is very different. It's you enriched and revised very much. So within a week. So
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Very. Yeah, I'm very thankful. So is there any people, any audience who raise questions or comments? Or if not, I think then because it's already time to close. So before closing this afternoon's talk, I'd like to inform you that our SSK Global Marxism Online Talk continues every Tuesday and Thursday till the end of this month. So I wish all of you could join remaining events too. So Professor Tairako, thanks very much again for the great talk. And many thanks also Professor Kevin Anderson and all of you for attending the talk. And so now I think it's time. Many thanks and bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much indeed.
You are welcome.
See you later.
See you.
Thank you, Tairako.
Thank you very much.